It was an ordinary Tuesday morning, and the store was buzzing with the usual hum of activity. The scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, blending with the soft rustling of paper bags and the clink of coins. Customers came and went, each lost in their own world, their own worries. But then, the doorbell jingled, and everything changed. Elon Musk walked into the store dressed casually, nothing like the high-profile billionaire everyone recognized. No expensive suits or flashy accessories, just a simple hoodie, jeans, and sneakers. At first glance, no one seemed to notice, until he reached the counter. The cashier, a young woman named Emily, was finishing up her shift, her eyes half-lidded from the fatigue of a long day. She wasn't expecting anything extraordinary to happen. After all, she had dealt with her share of celebrity sightings before. But when she looked up and saw the man standing before her, her heart skipped a beat. Was it really him? Emily had always dreamed of working in the tech world, of making a difference, but life had its own plans. Struggling to pay bills and juggling responsibilities, she found herself far from her dreams. Her job here wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and she had grown accustomed to the routine. She never imagined that today would be different. But then, as she rang up his items, she made a simple comment that would change everything. She had no idea what the words would trigger, how they would lead to a series of events that would challenge not only her life, but also Elon's. What happened next was beyond anyone's expectations, and it all began with a simple exchange at a small store on an ordinary Tuesday. Emily had always been a dreamer. Growing up in a small, bustling town, she was surrounded by the kind of hard-working people who quietly carried the weight of their lives with grace, never asking for much in return. Her family was no different. Her mother, a single parent, worked double shifts at a local diner just to keep food on the table and the lights on. Despite their financial struggles, Emily's mother instilled in her the belief that hard work and determination could carve a path to success. But the path Emily imagined was different from what reality had in store for her. As a child, she'd often find herself reading about the groundbreaking work being done in tech, the stories of inventors and entrepreneurs changing the world with their ideas. Emily dreamed of being part of that world, contributing something that would leave a lasting impact, something that could change people's lives. She envisioned herself working for a tech company, designing software or systems that could transform the way people connected with one another. The spark of that dream had stayed with her as she grew older, though the weight of adulthood quickly wore it down. After high school, she enrolled in a community college, balancing her studies with a part-time job at the local convenience store. But the reality of financial struggles hit hard. The tuition fees piled up, bills kept coming, and Emily's responsibilities grew as she took on more hours at the store to help her mother. Her dreams of a career in tech started to feel like a distant fantasy, something reserved for people with more resources or connections. In the mornings before the sun rose, Emily would wake up and make her mother breakfast before heading to her shift. She'd grab a worn backpack with a few textbooks tucked inside. But more often than not, she would leave them untouched in the break room, too tired or overwhelmed to study. The store was busy, and the day felt long. The bright fluorescent lights above hummed constantly, casting a harsh, sterile glow over the store. The sound of cash registers ringing, shelves being stocked, and the quiet shuffle of customers seemed to echo endlessly through the narrow aisles. Though Emily had learned to manage the day-to-day grind, there was a heaviness in her heart. She'd gotten used to the way things were, but deep down, she knew this wasn't the life she had imagined for herself. The endless cycle of work, pay bills, repeat. She often found herself drifting into daydreams, imagining what life would be like if she could just take that one leap toward something greater. But those moments of hope were fleeting, replaced by the reality that opportunities were often out of reach for people like her. Her mother's well-meaning advice was always the same. You just have to keep your head down, work hard, and things will get better. But Emily had learned over time that it wasn't that simple. Hard work didn't always lead to success, and dreams didn't always come true. Despite her frustrations, Emily had never lost her passion for technology. She would spend her spare moments reading articles or watching videos on coding and software development. It was in those moments, staring at her cracked phone screen late at night, that she felt the spark of something greater. It was a fleeting escape, but it kept her going, reminding her that maybe, just maybe, there was still time for her to make a difference. One of her closest friends, Ava, had been Emily's support system through all the years of uncertainty. Ava was always the one to cheer Emily on, telling her that she was more capable than she realized. Ava had a knack for spotting talent and had a contagious optimism that made it impossible not to believe in something bigger. "You got the drive, Em." "I know you do," Ava would say, her voice full of conviction. "Don't let this job fool you. You're meant for more than this place." But the harsh reality was that opportunities were scarce. The dreams Emily held on to so tightly were becoming harder to reach as time went on. She had watched others in her town give up on their dreams, their lives falling into predictable patterns. She often wondered if she would fall into the same trap, just another person working a job that didn't match her potential. Then came that Tuesday morning when the door jingled and everything began to change. The store was quieter than usual that morning. The hum of the fluorescent lights above was the only sound that filled the space. Emily stood behind the counter, scanning groceries, her mind wandering. The day had been long already, and it was only 10 a.m. She glanced out the window and watched the world outside. The steady stream of cars rushing by, people hurrying to start their day, and the heavy gray clouds that hung low in the sky. It felt like just another ordinary day, one that wouldn't stand out in her memory at all. But then, as she was ringing up a customer, the door swung open and the bell jingled. Emily didn't think much of it at first. People came and went all day. But then she saw him. An older man, frail and hunched over with a cane in hand, struggling to walk. He looked like he had been through something difficult. His clothes were ragged, and his face seemed worn down by life. He paused for a moment at the entrance, unsure of where to go, his eyes scanning the shelves before settling on the checkout counter. "Can I help you, sir?" Emily asked, her voice gentle. The man blinked slowly, taking a few steps forward. His voice cracked as he spoke. I just need to buy some bread. I don't have much, just enough for the basics. Can you help me?" Emily's heart ached as she looked at him. She could see the weariness in his eyes, the kind of tiredness that no amount of sleep could fix. She nodded, offering him a warm smile. "Of course. What kind of bread do you need?" The man shuffled over to the bread section, moving slowly, each step a struggle. Emily followed behind, walking beside him as he reached for a loaf, his hand trembling slightly. She noticed the slight hunch in his shoulders, the deep lines etched into his face. He didn't speak much, but she could sense the weight of his life, the hardships that had shaped him. When they returned to the counter, Emily noticed the small, crumpled bills the man had pulled from his pocket. It wasn't enough. The total was $2.50 more than what he had. Emily's heart sank. She had been in that exact situation before, counting every dollar, wondering if it would stretch far enough. But she also knew how hard it was to ask for help, to admit you didn't have enough, to feel like you were a burden to someone else. The man looked down at the counter, his face flushing with embarrassment. "I'm sorry, I thought I had more," he said, his voice filled with regret. "I'll put it back." Emily quickly held up her hand, stopping him before he could turn away. She could feel her stomach twist in that familiar way. The tension between what she knew she should do and the fear of overstepping, of giving away something she couldn't afford. But in that moment, something inside her clicked. It wasn't just about the money. It was about making a difference in someone else's life, no matter how small. She took a breath, her decision already made. "Don't worry about it," she said softly. "I've got it covered." The man looked up at her, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What? But you don't have to do that." "I want to," Emily replied, smiling. "It's just a few dollars. I'll pay for it." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world outside seemed to disappear. The noise, the rush of the day, it all faded into the background. The man simply stared at her, his eyes welling up with tears. He couldn't believe that someone would do something so kind for him, a stranger. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I don't know what to say." Emily nodded, the weight of the moment settling over her. She knew it was just a small act. $2.50 didn't seem like much in the grand scheme of things. But in that moment, it meant everything to the man in front of her. His gratitude was evident, And it was a reminder that sometimes the simplest acts of kindness could have the most profound impact. As he left, he turned to her one last time. "You got a good heart," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Don't let the world change that." The words lingered in the air long after he had gone. Emily stood at the counter, her hands shaking slightly as she wiped them on her apron. She hadn't done it for the recognition or the thanks. She had done it because it felt right, because she knew what it was like to struggle and feel alone. It was a simple, small thing, but it mattered. She glanced down at the crumpled bills in her hand, her lunch money for the day. She had barely enough to get by. But something about that moment, something about the man's words, filled her up in a way that no amount of money could. She had made a difference in his life, even if it was just for a moment. In the days that followed, Emily couldn't stop thinking about the man. It wasn't just the act itself that stuck with her, but the way it had made her feel. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she had done something meaningful, something that mattered. The small act of kindness had shifted something inside her, making her realize that no matter how hard life got, there was always room to be kind, to give, to help. The truth was, Emily had been caught up in the stress of her own struggles for so long that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to make a difference in someone else's life. But that day, she had remembered. And for the first time in a long time, she felt hope. A hope that things could change, that maybe her dreams weren't so far out of reach after all. The next week passed in a blur for Emily. The days seemed to blend together as she continued working her shifts at the store, trying to keep up with the rhythm of life that felt a little more suffocating every day. The man she had helped lingered in her thoughts, but she didn't expect anything to come of it. Acts of kindness were often just fleeting moments in the chaos of life. She went back to her usual routine, keeping her head down, pushing through, trying to make ends meet. But then, on a Friday afternoon, just as the store was about to close, the bell above the door jingled once more. Emily glanced up from the register, half expecting it to be another customer just needing a quick purchase before the day ended. However, what she saw took her by surprise. Standing in the doorway was a middle-aged woman, dressed in a sleek coat and carrying a leather briefcase. There was something striking about her, confident, poised, and undeniably professional. She looked like someone who didn't belong in the small, modest store, and Emily felt a slight unease wash over her. She had never seen this woman before. The woman walked toward the counter, her gaze steady. "Are you Emily?" she asked, her voice calm and measured. Emily blinked, momentarily caught off guard. Yes, that's me," she said, a knot forming in her stomach. "Can I help you?" The woman smiled faintly, then placed a business card on the counter. It was sleek and professional, bearing the logo of a prestigious financial firm. Emily's heart raced as she read the card silently. This was someone from the world of high finance, a world that felt a million miles away from the checkout counter where she stood. "I'm Jessica Stevens," the woman introduced herself. "I'm here because of a man you helped recently. His name is George Radcliffe." A flash of recognition hit Emily. George, the elderly man she had helped with the bread. She hadn't thought about him in days, but now his name brought back the memory of their brief encounter. Her heart skipped a beat, wondering why someone like this woman would be looking for her. "I'm not sure I understand," Emily said, her voice trembling slightly. "Why are you here? I just helped him with a small purchase. There's no need for any attention. It was nothing." Jessica's expression softened. "It wasn't nothing," she said gently. "It meant more to him than you know. George is a client of ours, but he's not just any client. He's, well, a very special one." Emily felt a sinking feeling in her stomach. She had no idea what was happening, but the way Jessica spoke made it clear this wasn't just a casual visit. "What do you mean?" she asked. Jessica glanced around the store as if to make sure they were alone, then leaned in slightly, her voice low. "You may not realize it, but George is one of the wealthiest men in the country. He's a philanthropist, a major investor in many causes. His wealth is vast, and he's been quietly looking for someone to pass on some of it to. Someone who has a good heart, someone who isn't blinded by money or status." Emily froze, her mind spinning. The wealthy man she had helped, this man who could have easily paid for his bread with a small fraction of his wealth, had noticed her. not just for the help she had given him in a small moment, but for the kindness behind it. You see, George has a particular philosophy, Jessica continued, her eyes meeting Emily's. He believes that the world needs more people like you. Selfless, compassionate, untainted by the greed and ambition that can so easily cloud a person's judgment. And after he left here that day, he asked me to look into you. Emily's mouth went dry. You looked into me? Jessica nodded. George wanted to know more about you, Emily. He has a way of doing that. Finding people who have something special, even when they don't realize it themselves. He sees potential where others might not. A cold wave of confusion washed over Emily. This couldn't be real. It didn't make sense. She had simply helped someone, done a small, kind thing. Nothing more. She didn't deserve this. "Emily," he began, his voice calm and steady. "I see something in you that not everyone can. You're doing more than you realize. This isn't just about the work we're doing here. This is about the kind of person you've always been. You've faced your own challenges, yet you've stayed true to yourself. That's what matters." Emily's chest tightened as he spoke. The words hit her harder than she expected. All her struggles, all the time she had questioned whether she was enough, they didn't define her. What mattered was her heart, her willingness to act with kindness, her ability to push forward even when the world seemed to hold her back. That day, Emily made a decision. She would no longer let the pressures of her new life convince her that she was an imposter. She had earned her place in this world, not because of the accolades or the opportunities, but because she had remained true to the values she had always held dear. As her confidence grew, so did her impact. Emily became a leader in her own right, spearheading initiatives that improved the lives of thousands. She started to see the ripple effect of her actions. Her work was making a tangible difference, and slowly, people began to recognize not just her intellect, but her unwavering compassion. Emily wasn't just a product of George's mentorship. She was becoming a force of her own, shaping the world around her in ways she had never imagined. One afternoon, Emily found herself back at the small store she had once worked at, standing behind the register, looking out at the familiar faces of her community. Her return was a reminder of how far she had come. As she helped a young mother pick out groceries, a sense of peace washed over her. She realized that she hadn't just transformed her own life. She had also paved the way for others to follow in her footsteps. When she walked out of the store that day, Emily wasn't the same person who had walked in months ago. She was different, stronger, more confident, more sure of who she was and what she could achieve. But even more importantly, she had discovered a sense of purpose, a purpose rooted in kindness, in compassion, and in making the world a better place. Her story wasn't just about success. It was about the power of a single selfless act to change everything. It was about realizing that no matter how small or insignificant an act may seem, it can spark a transformation that ripples outwards, touching the lives of others in ways you may never fully understand. Emily's journey was a testament to the fact that sometimes, the greatest reward comes not from what you receive, but from the person you become along the way. And as she looked out at the world, she knew that her story wasn't over yet. There was still so much more she could do. But for the first time, she no longer feared the future. She embraced it, knowing that whatever came next, she was ready. Emily's story teaches us one powerful lesson. Small acts of kindness can have an extraordinary impact, not just on others, but on ourselves. It's easy to think that our efforts go unnoticed, or that we don't have the power to make a difference, especially when life feels overwhelming. Yet, Emily's journey proves that even the smallest gesture, a simple act of kindness, can set off a chain of events that leads to profound transformation. Take a moment to reflect. How could a small act of kindness change your life or someone else's? Imagine the ripple effect. A helping hand offered at the right time, a word of encouragement when it's most needed, or a decision to help someone, even when it seems insignificant. What if the kindness you offer today becomes the seed that inspires change in ways you could never predict? Consider Emily's growth. She was not an extraordinary person when she first set out. She was just like many of us, working hard, juggling responsibilities, and trying to make ends meet. But what set her apart was her willingness to help when it mattered most. It wasn't the size of her actions that made a difference. It was the authenticity of her heart, her unyielding commitment to others. In the same way, you don't have to wait for a big moment or grand opportunity to make a difference. You can start right now, today. Whether it's lending a hand to a neighbor, listening with empathy to a friend, or volunteering your time to a cause close to your heart, your actions matter. They matter more than you think. So, what will you do? How can you use your time, your talents, your kindness to change your world and the world around you? I encourage you to take this message to heart, share it, and inspire others. If Emily's story resonated with you, imagine what impact it could have on someone else. Share this story, comment your thoughts, and like this video to continue the conversation. Together, we can spread kindness and encourage one another to create a world where compassion thrives.